The Callisto Protocol is a new survival horror game made by Striking Dance Studios, whose lead was the creator of Dead Space. This was set out to be a spiritual successor to those games, and it did have a lot of promise considering a good amount of people from the original game were developing this one. But sadly, it didn't really reach the quality everybody wanted. Now, this game gathered a lot of controversy at launch because the PC port was absolutely awful. People were constantly stuttering, dropping FPS, and the performance was just a joke, even on the most expensive of hardware.
Oh, this is not that bit in Dead Space 2, except this is because it's 7 FPS. Look at the frame rate! Look at the frame rate! I'm done. PowerPoint.
It was essentially released in an unplayable state on computers. For me personally, it was pretty bad, and I found that disabling some things like VSync, motion blur, and switching to DirectX 11 helped quite a lot, but it still performed pretty horribly. They did release a patch a little later that fixed a decent amount of the performance issues, but I still had some horrible FPS drops during combat especially. One thing to keep in mind is that this is the first time studio, so there are bound to be issues, but considering the people behind it, it's a little disappointing. So here are my thoughts on the game. Start off with my praises. The game visually is stunning. Even on medium settings, it looks absolutely incredible. It has some of the best graphics, lighting, and animations we've seen in a AAA title lately. Environments have an unparalleled amount of detail and care put into them, and they really are gorgeous. The animations were done using motion capture and also look amazing. And the facial animations especially look incredibly realistic. Enemies also look great and highly detailed. Really everything visually in this game is just a masterclass. And on the other side with audio, the audio design is flawless. This game has some of the best sound design I've heard in a game. Every single sound is incredibly high quality, and the gore sounds especially are super meaty and gross. Enemies make your standard modern zombie sounds, but they still sound good. Outside of technical praises, my others are kind of a mixed bag. For example, combat. It goes like this. An enemy runs up to you and will take 1 to 3 swings, so just press A or D to dodge, then hit a few times until it swings at you again. Dodge, then hit, and then repeat this until it's dead. This system gets far too repetitive in the mid to late game. They do introduce some variety, like tentacles. After a few hits to a zombie, tentacles will come out, and you have to shoot them, or else it'll become a more powerful enemy. This adds a little variety, but just a little. It definitely stresses you out when you're fighting a few enemies, and then a tentacle zombie does make its transformation. But you can't even really get overwhelmed by enemies in this game, because the combat falls apart when there's more than 2. In a large group of enemies, when you're fighting one, the others just kind of stand around and wait till it's their turn to hit you. And rinsing and repeating this combat over the game gets very repetitive. But there are guns and the gravity hand. The guns you get over the game are a pistol, a shotgun, assault rifle, and a tactical pistol. They don't add a lot, if I'll be honest. The only thing I really used them for was for tentacles and the occasional shot to do some extra damage. The combat does get a lot more fun with the gravity hand. You can use this to pick up enemies and chuck them. If you throw them on a wall, it won't really do damage until you get an upgrade. But the main reason you use it is to throw enemies into the various hazards. There are grinders, fans, and walls of spike you can throw them and it'll insta-kill them. Doing this either by melee combat or the gravity hand is actually really fun. So that's essentially all the combat in this game, and there are some spoilers about enemies in the late game, so just go to the story section if you want no spoilers. Later in the game, a new blind zombie gets introduced that only reacts to sound. You can stealth behind them and stab them to death. You can pick them up with a gravity hand and chuck them into a wall, or you can use a bomb if there is one. It's all pretty fun, but is also broken. The blinds are completely oblivious to all stealth kills, as long as you're crouching. It doesn't matter if you stab one a few feet away from another, they just won't notice. It's just completely broken and takes away any challenge from large groups of blinds. Away from the blinds, you can still stealth kill normal enemies, but if there are others, they'll see you. Stealth is fun, but has no challenge when you're doing it against blinds. The next thing is story. The story is, in my opinion, good enough. The basic plot synopsis is that you're Jacob Lee, a pilot who crashed on Callisto and was taken in to be an inmate for what seems like no reason, only to wake up and the whole prison is having an outbreak. Your goal is to escape and fight your way through the monsters. The characters are decent enough and the whole story is interesting to go through. The next thing I want to talk about is the levels. The levels are pretty straightforward and linear. There is not much exploration, which is a little bit of a disappointment. I found myself wanting to explore rooms more, but not finding much. There are a lot of rooms that serve no purpose. You can go into them, find no items, no enemies, no voice logs, just a room. Sometimes there will be exploration, like one time I jumped down a hole I thought was the right way, only to find myself in a bloodworm nest. I made my way through it, got attacked by an enemy, and found a chest with some items. That was pretty cool because it added some context to the games that these things are nesting, and gave me some items. But I rarely ever felt that. The last thing I want to talk about is fear. This is a horror game, and I was expecting to get a lot of good scares. But all I really got were tons of mediocre jump scares and attempts at scaring the player. I didn't find myself being legitimately scared most of the game, and the only times I was actually on edge was in the bloodworm nests. For a horror game, this was surprisingly not very scary, but that's just me and it can vary person by person. So, in conclusion, the Callisto Protocol is, in my opinion, a decent game. It has a lot of glaring issues, but overall I liked it and actually did have a really fun time with it. If $60 is well within your budget and an action horror game is your thing, I would say go for it. For fans looking for a more survival horror experience, I would say either play the original Dead Space games, and if you've already played those, wait for the Dead Space remake. There are absolutely far better horror games than the Callisto Protocol, but that doesn't take away from some of the value it has. It has good acting, especially from Josh Duhamel and Karen Fukuhara, a fun enough gameplay, good graphics and sound, a decent story, and a pretty good atmosphere. And while I enjoyed it, there are just a lot of weird design choices that kind of take away from it, and honestly, I just found myself wanting more while playing it. And it was pretty short. I beat it in about 6 hours, but for me personally, I didn't mind it. So, those are my thoughts on the Callisto Protocol. If it looks interesting to you, and $60 is fine enough for you, I would say pick it up and try it for yourself instead of looking at the reviews and immediately disregarding it, because there is a good chance that you'll have a fun time with it. And that's about it. Thanks for watching.